I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. The words of Jesus to you and to me, and we could use some fullness right now. We don't feel very full. Most of us feel a little bit down. Either we're down about the whole shutdown, we're down about family members who might be struggling with COVID, we're concerned about friends and relatives who are on the front lines in hospitals or working law enforcement. We've got a lot of concerns. The economy, our livelihood, we'll be able to pay the bills. We try to keep a positive attitude and look ahead. We even think like, you know what, if we could just have the state fair at the end of the summer, it would all be all right. That's what we do. We try to stay positive, but we're not exactly sure that we're full. It's hard to think of life as being anything like the full Jesus talks about. Maybe the question is, what is life to the full? Does it depend on Sweet Martha's cookies? What about if your income is going down the tubes and you've got rent due? What if you're separated from friends or your sports season's been canceled? You can't go to a movie, the restaurants are closed, the tennis courts are chained, and the pools are drained. And you can't even get a haircut. Well, where did you come up with that?
You just gotta know the right people to ask.
Sort of does depend who you ask, doesn't it? You know, I know some of you have heard me talk about Brother Tin in the past. How we would get together and get lunch once a month, on a Wednesday. His big idea was to introduce me to all the Vietnamese restaurants in Minneapolis and St. Paul. But the truth is, we typically ended up at the same restaurant every time. There was a man who owned this restaurant who Tin loved. They had served together in the Vietnamese army. Well, I don't know if they served together in a unit. The one guy was special ops, but they were in a concentration camp together after the war. They both made it to America and made a better life for themselves and their families. And so we'd stop in, and Tin would say it's important that we visit with him. He's Buddhist. I'd like him to know Jesus. So we'd visit, ask how the family was and how things were, back and forth. Here were two guys who had been through so much of the same experiences. Through the war, through the concentration camps, now in America. And one was happy, one wasn't. One knew Jesus, and one didn't. When Tin and I would eat, I'd ask him almost every time. It'd come down to the same kind of questions. I'd be like, Tin, how did you do it? How did you stay faithful? How did you stay strong when you were in a concentration camp? And he'd kind of smile and laugh and say, well, I think God looked at me and said, this one's a little rough around the edges. He's rambunctious. I'll take the edge off. And he made me fit to serve him. Can you have a life to the full in a concentration camp? Last week I had a call from an old friend. We've been friends as long as I really remember. Tuan, his family came from Vietnam as well. His mom had recently passed away. Asked if I would help with the service, and I was humbled, honored, and began to reflect on his mom and their family. How they just got out of Vietnam right at the end. In fact, Tuan's oldest brother was in the military. And like Tin, he was captured and put in a concentration camp. He never got to come to America. His mom courageously had all those children and brought them to a new place, a new country, made a life for them. She would never be able to be in her real home again, right? But she made a home here. I stood there at the podium, and because of COVID-19, there were only 8 people were allowed. And the kids and their spouses were lined up in one row, and then skip a row, and then another row, and then lined up distance the other way. Twan's mom loved to garden. And looking at the family, I realized I was looking at her garden, lined up just like you would line up in your seeds this spring when you plant. And there they were in full bloom. Can that kind of sacrifice be life in its full? The world has a hard time understanding Jesus. What does he mean? Well, Jesus says his sheep understand. They hear his voice. And maybe you caught John's comment. Did you catch it? Jesus used the figure of speech, but they did not understand. Well, they didn't understand because they weren't his sheep. They heard him. They just couldn't recognize the voice. The voice they heard was more like the voice of the world. It says, this is life. This is it. The fullness of life. Fullness of life. Maybe it's the big yellow slide. They couldn't get that there was more than just today, that life is not just in this moment. How do we live life to the full? Not just a life that's full today, but a life that's full for today and eternity. Maybe we should start with just the straight facts. There's 2 ways this can go. There are 2 that are coming for you and for me. There's one who intends life for us, and there's one who intends harm for us. His intent is to kill you. Maybe you've always thought that life would be very exciting if it could be a little bit like an action movie. Well, this is real. His intent is to fool you into following him. He may seduce you. He may hunt you off the edges of the flock, peel you off, make you vulnerable. That's why Hebrews 10 says, do not neglect meeting together, because when you are scattered from the flock, you're vulnerable. And right now, do you think that enemy is liking this? Oh yeah. He's liking it that we're all peeled off and separated right now. You can call him a thief, you can call him a wolf, but he lives for this. Isolation, separation, the stuff that he can work to kill you spiritually, eternally. And he's coming, and he's no joke. Now, if I'm at my home, and there's a murderer coming for me, someone who wants to break in and take my life, he's a thief, he's a liar, he's a destroyer, he's a killer, what do you think I'm going to do? What are you going to do? I'll tell you what I'm going to do is those doors are going to get locked up tight. Windows are going to get shut. boarded up, and the guns are going to come out. Because I'm not losing my life for some killer. This is the real thing that we face. There is someone who wants to take your life. He wants you to believe that just live and eat and get rich, and if that doesn't work for you, just take whatever you want and say that that's life and then die. That's one. The other one who's coming for you is coming to find you and save you. He's the good shepherd who puts himself, as our text, if we kept reading today, he puts himself between the killer and the sheep. And he will lay down his life to protect the flock. This is the one who created you and wants you to know forever an eternal relationship with God. How do you know the difference? Seems like a dumb question, doesn't it? But a lot of people struggle with it. How do you know the difference between the liar, the killer, and the good shepherd? Well, how do you know fullness from emptiness? Well, an unmistakable mark of the Good Shepherd is that he calls his sheep by name. He calls you by name. He knows me. He knows you. You notice that when you read in the Gospel of John that all the encounters Jesus has are very personal encounters. He meets Nicodemus by night. He meets the woman at the well in Samaria alone. He meets the man at the pool of Bethesda. He's been there 38 years, hopeless. And Jesus comes now as he came then. He comes into the places of our loneliness and our separation and our anxiety and depression or fear. And he calls us by name. And he loves you like only God can love you. He calls you by name and he leads you out. He leads you out of the emptiness of this world, all of the fake stuff, all of the things that says it's all about the big yellow slide, to the real adventure of living for God. Takes you out of the lies of the world so you can see how all of those false pleasures, when they're stripped down and you can see the world for what it is. This is our time. Right now in this shutdown is a very, very good time. It can actually be a time of blessing for us if we'll receive it. To see all of the emptiness that this world says is full, but to see it for what it is. And to understand what Paul meant when he wrote to the Philippians, "For the sake of Jesus Christ, I have suffered the loss of all things, and I count them all as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ." How could he say that? How can you say that? With all of the limitations on our lives right now, doesn't it seem like, oh, how can you say that, Paul? It's because Paul knew what we are just discovering, maybe some of us for the first time, that the promises of this world are as empty as a big yellow slide behind a fence. But what Jesus gives is eternal. It isn't that he just knows us by name or that he leads us out. He opens us up to know God personally. And he goes on before us. Whatever it is that we face, a concentration camp in Vietnam, the loneliness and fears of a new country and a new home, a pandemic, whatever we face, the pressures, the dangers, toils, and snares, he has already gone. That's why David spoke of Jesus in Psalm 23. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? For thou art with me. That's a full life. Your life can be full in a concentration camp. It can be full in a foreign land. It can be full on the streets, no matter what we face, because our life is not about the world. It's about Jesus. He knows your name. He leads you out and He leads you in, and you can trust Him. You can trust Him, and I can trust Him with our lives because He has conquered death for you and for me, because He stands at the gate and nobody's passing, not Him. He will lead us out and He will lead us in and bring us to safety. And if you haven't trusted Him, you might wonder about me. That's fair. But let me ask you, who can save you? Can the state fair opening this late summer save you? Can the governor save you? Can the president save you? Can your 401k deliver you? I know who can save. And I know every word that He's given has never failed. I've failed. I've failed Him, but He has never failed me. He keeps His promise. He will keep His promise to you. Just listen for His voice. Listen for His voice today.